Orlando International Airport, Florida, 3:27 p.m., December 8, 2024. Chelsea Malone, a 32-year-old self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer with a TikTok following of 11, was ready to take to the skies, or so she thought. Having just come from what she described as a networking brunch, read, bottomless mimosas with friends, Chelsea arrived at the Southwest Airlines boarding gate for Flight 237 to Dallas. The holiday season hustle and bustle filled the terminal, but all eyes soon turned to Chelsea as her slightly wobbly gait and overly loud proclamations about her tight schedule caught the attention of airline staff. What started as a routine check-in quickly devolved into an unforgettable spectacle, a dramatic tale of defiance, questionable choices, and the unfortunate combination of alcohol and air travel regulations. Chelsea strutted into Orlando International Airport with the kind of confidence that only 3, or maybe 4, pre-flight cocktails could inspire. She teetered on her stiletto heels, her gait a curious mix of swagger and instability, like a newborn deer that had just discovered martinis. Her oversized sunglasses perched crookedly on her nose, and a glittery tote bag swung precariously from her elbow, knocking into fellow travelers who wisely stepped aside. Her mood was buoyant, her cheeks flushed with the telltale rosy hue of celebratory libations. Chelsea was ready to own the skies, her upcoming flight to Dallas just another stage for her ongoing performance as the main character in life. But as she approached the Southwest Airlines boarding gate, her confidence began to falter. A pair of steely-eyed gate agents scanned her up and down, their practiced gaze landing on the faint glaze over her eyes and the rhythmic sway in her stance that suggested more than just holiday cheer. Before she could hand over her boarding pass, one of the agents gently raised a hand. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we can't allow you to board this flight today. You appear to be intoxicated," they said with the kind of professional politeness reserved for situations that could go from zero to viral in 30 seconds. Chelsea's jaw dropped in theatrical disbelief. "What do you mean, intoxicated?" she demanded, her words slurring slightly. "I'm fine. This is ridiculous. You didn't even, breathalyze me or whatever." She gestured wildly, nearly toppling her tote bag onto the floor. Her voice grew louder, drawing the attention of the surrounding passengers, who exchanged knowing glances. "I had, 3 drinks. Maybe 4. Definitely no more than 4. That's basically water for someone like me. I can even alphabet backwards." "Wanna see?" she challenged, jabbing a manicured finger toward the agent. Chelsea then proceeded to draw an imaginary alphabet in the air, her hand wobbling like a malfunctioning compass. Somewhere around the invisible letter Q, her movements grew even less coordinated, and the skeptical expressions on the gate agents' faces turned to restrained exasperation. It was becoming clear to everyone within earshot that this was not just a spirited holiday traveler, but someone dangerously close to grounding an entire boarding process. The gate agent, Karen, whose name tag read Karen D., with the air of someone deeply aware of the memes, smiled with a practiced calm. It was the kind of smile honed through years of fielding complaints about delays, luggage fees, and why peanuts aren't served anymore. It was also the kind of patience typically required when dealing with overtired toddlers or cats who refused to come down from the curtains. "Ma'am," Karen began, her voice steady but edged with the faint exhaustion of someone about to recite a familiar script. "Per FAA regulations, we are required to deny boarding to any passenger who appears intoxicated. This policy is in place for your safety and the safety of everyone on board." Chelsea, swaying slightly as she clutched her designer tote, raised an eyebrow with the precision of a reality TV star mid-confessional. "Safety? Sweetheart, the only thing dangerous about me is how fabulous I look at 30,000 feet." She punctuated this declaration with an attempted twirl, her heeled boots betraying her as they slid on the polished airport floor. The resulting spin would have been impressive under different circumstances, had it not ended with Chelsea grabbing the nearest stable object for balance. Unfortunately, this object was a trash can, which she clasped like a long-lost lover. The can wobbled precariously under her grip, its contents threatening to spill. Karen's serene expression didn't falter, though a single twitch of her left eyebrow betrayed her inner monologue. "Ma'am," she continued, after a beat to let the trash can regain its composure, "this is not a judgment. We simply have guidelines we must follow. If you'd like, we can help rebook your flight for later today or tomorrow once you've had time to refresh." Chelsea released the trash can with a flourish, as though it were part of the performance, and turned back to Karen. "Refresh? Honey, I am refreshed. I had brunch. It's practically a health ritual." Her tone grew more indignant, and she gestured dramatically to the gate area as though expecting applause. By now, several other passengers had taken notice. Some exchanged amused glances, while others pretended not to watch, holding their phones just slightly higher than necessary. Karen, however, remained stoic, her hands folded neatly in front of her as she prepared to deliver the next phase of the airline's standard intoxicated passenger procedure. It was clear that this wasn't Karen's first rodeo, or her first encounter with a brunch enthusiast who believed that mimosa consumption was no barrier to air travel. But as Chelsea's theatrical protests grew louder, it became equally clear that Karen's patience, though vast, was not infinite. As gate agent Karen attempted to explain the rebooking process with a practiced calmness that only years of handling disgruntled travelers could provide, Chelsea launched into what could best be described as a one-woman protest performance. It began with theatrical arm flailing, resembling an amateur interpretive dance more than a reasoned argument. "You're punishing me for my dedication to hydration," Chelsea exclaimed dramatically, her voice rising with each syllable. She insisted that her pre-flight cocktails were a perfectly reasonable way to prepare for air travel, equating them to a spa treatment for the soul. "Do I look like the kind of person who flies dehydrated?" she scoffed, as if this was a universally recognized sin. Chelsea's grievances soon extended beyond her own predicament. She passionately critiqued Southwest Airlines' entire approach to customer service, taking a particularly sharp jab at their in-flight snacks. "Pretzels for peasants," she declared with a flourish, her tone suggesting she believed herself to be leading a revolution. Her tirade painted an unflattering portrait of an airline she accused of culinary neglect. But the piece de resistance of Chelsea's rant was her claim of being a victim of what she dramatically termed aviation discrimination. She argued that she was being unfairly targeted for her appearance and vibrant energy, turning what could have been a minor inconvenience into an impassioned stand for justice, or at least, her version of it. Meanwhile, Karen, maintaining the composure of a saint, subtly reached for the gate phone to call for backup. Chelsea, noticing the gesture, narrowed her eyes and pointed accusingly. "Sky Dictator," she barked, christening Karen with a title she had likely never heard before, nor would ever forget. As the tension escalated, passengers gathered nearby to witness the unfolding drama. Some filmed the scene with their phones, their muted giggles barely concealed. Karen, now joined by a fellow gate agent who looked equally weary, attempted to calm Chelsea with reassurances of rebooking options. But Chelsea was having none of it. "You'll hear from my lawyer," she proclaimed, though it was unclear if she had one, or if a lawyer could even handle cases involving pretzels and perceived hydration injustices. The situation spiraled further, setting the stage for an inevitable intervention by airport security. By this point, Karen's calm demeanor had transitioned into the resigned expression of someone who knew this story would become a legend in the break room. Enter the Orlando Police Department, stage left. Two officers, both wearing the patient but stern expressions of people who've seen one too many travel meltdowns, approached Chelsea. She greeted them with a theatrical combination of faux charm and simmering suspicion, the kind one might expect from a reality TV contestant in the middle of a dramatic confrontation. "Gentlemen," she exclaimed, throwing her arms wide in an exaggerated flourish that nearly knocked over a nearby stroller. "Surely you're here to apologize on behalf of this oppressive airline." Her tone suggested she believed herself to be a victim of grave injustice, and perhaps also that she was starring in her own courtroom drama. The officers, seasoned in the art of dealing with public disturbances, exchanged a glance. This was not their first rodeo. Remaining unfazed, the taller of the two spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, the airline has made its decision. You won't be boarding this flight. You can either wait here to sober up or make arrangements to rebook with another airline. Those are your options." Chelsea blinked, momentarily stunned by the simplicity and finality of the statement. Then, like a poorly scripted plot twist, her face lit up with an idea that she clearly thought was brilliant. "Or," she began, her voice rising with the enthusiasm of someone pitching a startup, "I could start a revolution against this tyranny." The officers raised their eyebrows, not quite sure if she was joking or seriously considering overthrowing the aviation industry. Chelsea, however, was undeterred. She turned to the growing crowd of onlookers, throwing out her arms like a revolutionary leader addressing the masses. "Who's with me?" she shouted, her voice echoing through the terminal. "Together, we can demand our right to fly free." The officers exchanged another glance, this time one that said, "This is going in the report." One of them gently but firmly stepped forward. "Ma'am, let's stay focused here. You need to leave the secure area if you're not flying today." Chelsea's revolutionary zeal began to falter as the reality of the situation crept in. She crossed her arms defiantly, her voice dropping into a dramatic whisper. "You can't silence me. This is America." The officers, clearly suppressing eye rolls, kept their tone professional. "We're not silencing you, ma'am. We're asking you to comply with airline policy and airport security rules. Let's make this simple." But Chelsea had already decided that simplicity was beneath her. With the dramatic flair of someone who watches too many courtroom dramas, she pointed an accusatory finger at the officers. "I know my rights," she declared, though it was becoming increasingly evident that her understanding of those rights was shaky at best. As the officers patiently reiterated her options for the third time, Chelsea sighed loudly, clearly unimpressed with their lack of enthusiasm for her imagined rebellion. The standoff continued, the crowd growing more entertained by the minute. By this point, Chelsea had fully embraced her self-appointed role as a crusader against what she dramatically labeled aviation tyranny. Standing her ground in the boarding area like a modern-day heroine of misplaced indignation, she refused to budge despite the presence of uniformed officers and increasingly exasperated Southwest Airlines staff. Her voice carried above the usual hum of airport announcements and rolling luggage, attracting an unintended audience. Chelsea, evidently energized by this unintended spotlight, accused the police of being gatekeeper goons, a phrase she repeated with a kind of conviction one might reserve for groundbreaking political speeches. She gestured wildly as she declared that she was standing up not only for herself but for all passengers wrongfully denied their wings. Then came the monologue. Oh, the monologue. Starting with a loose diatribe about freedom and aviation rights, Chelsea's rhetoric quickly spiraled into the absurd. At one point, she referenced the constitutional right to fly, which drew puzzled looks from even the most sympathetic onlookers. Just as the officers began discussing next steps, Chelsea pivoted to an impassioned plea involving her cat, Mr. Whiskerbottom. How exactly Mr. Whiskerbottom factored into her argument remained unclear, but Chelsea was adamant that he would be devastated by her absence and that his emotional well-being somehow made her case a moral imperative. The officers, experienced in handling public outbursts, maintained their calm demeanor. They issued several clear warnings. Chelsea needed to leave the secured area voluntarily, or they would have no choice but to take action. However, their words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Chelsea, in a theatrical display, raised her hands dramatically and declared, "Arrest me if you must. History will remember me." Despite the officers' attempts to de-escalate, Chelsea's antics only became more pronounced. She sat cross-legged on the floor, proclaiming that she was occupying Gate 17 in the name of justice. Onlookers, some recording the spectacle, began laughing quietly, while others stood in disbelief at the absurdity of the scene. The officers exchanged weary glances, fully aware that reason would not prevail in this situation. They braced themselves for what promised to be a very long afternoon. Chelsea's refusal to comply had officially turned into a performance art piece, with bystanders unsure if they had accidentally wandered into a bizarre reality show. Unknown to Chelsea, her obstinance was not winning her any support. Instead, it ensured that her holiday season would be spent dealing with consequences far more serious than simply missing her flight. By now, the terminal had become an unintended stage, with Chelsea as its lead performer. Her refusal to leave the secured area had attracted more onlookers, many of whom were recording the debacle on their phones, undoubtedly preparing to turn her meltdown into a viral sensation. Despite the officers' repeated attempts to calm the situation, Chelsea dug in her heels, literally and metaphorically, refusing to budge. When asked for the 12th time to vacate the premises, Chelsea paused, let out a melodramatic sigh worthy of Shakespearean tragedy, and declared, "You'll regret this." With a dramatic tilt of her head, she gathered what was left of her dignity and saliva, and tried to spit at one of the officers. Unfortunately for Chelsea, or fortunately for the officer, her aim was off. The spit sailed harmlessly through the air, landing somewhere near an unoccupied row of seats. But it wasn't the accuracy that mattered, it was the intent. That single act of aggression was enough to escalate the situation from a mere difficult passenger to a criminal offense. The officers acted swiftly, arresting her for disorderly conduct and assault. As they informed her of the charges, Chelsea responded with what could only be described as a bizarre act of resistance. Instead of complying or protesting verbally, she began a chaotic display that could be best described as an interpretive dance gone terribly wrong, flailing her arms, twisting her body, and stamping her feet in a rhythm entirely disconnected from reality. One officer later compared it to watching a malfunctioning robot trying to learn ballet. The handcuffs snapped into place as Chelsea continued her impromptu performance, loudly proclaiming, "You're all going to be so sorry. My uncle's a lawyer," a claim that was later proven to be false. The officers remained composed, despite her dramatic outbursts, and began escorting her toward the terminal's exit. The crowd of spectators had grown, some clapping sarcastically, while others openly laughed, narrating the events on live streams or jotting down notes for future anecdotes. The entire debacle was both tragic and oddly comedic, a perfect storm of poor judgment and over-the-top theatrics. Chelsea left Orlando International Airport not aboard her Southwest Airlines flight, but in the back of a police cruiser, her dramatic exit the cherry on top of a truly unforgettable day. By the time she was escorted into the holding area at the Orlando Police Department, her day had transformed from bad to downright absurd. She wasn't greeted with sympathy but with the harsh reality of the charges quickly being filed against her. The arresting officers, accustomed to disruptive travelers, exchanged glances as they filled out her charge sheet, which read like a masterclass in bad life choices: disorderly conduct, battery, resisting arrest, and criminal mischief. Each charge seemed to fit more perfectly than the last. Disorderly conduct for her incoherent tirade against Southwest Airlines staff, accusations of incompetence, and discrimination. Battery for the moment she spat at Officer Perez, an act that turned her previous attempts at de-escalation into a moot point. Resisting arrest was self-explanatory. Chelsea clung to the secured area like a child refusing to leave a toy store, screaming about her rights and how she was a paying customer who knew how to behave better than these clowns. Finally, criminal mischief, thanks to the damage Chelsea caused to the police car, including smudging the window with her face and kicking the door, leaving minor dents and scratches. In the holding area, Chelsea, ever the influencer, seemed unfazed. Instead of reflecting on her actions, she pulled out her phone and began typing furiously, perhaps crafting the perfect post to describe her harrowing ordeal. She even had the audacity to claim, in her live stream, that she could pay her $13,500 bond in exposure bucks from her 11 loyal TikTok followers. Her followers, mostly her mom and a few former college roommates, might have been surprised to hear their support would pay her bond, but Chelsea remained undeterred. "Who needs cash when you have a viral following?" she shouted at the officers as though they were all in on the joke. Her defiant attitude only seemed to irritate the already exasperated officers, who, after processing her details, continued their work with a professionalism reserved for far less dramatic situations. As Chelsea's bond was set, her thoughts wandered, not to the seriousness of the situation, but to the content she could create. Perhaps a "get arrested with me" video could turn things around. After all, any press was good press, right? She imagined the headlines: "Influencer gets busted for spitting on cops," and couldn't help but grin at the thought of the engagement it would bring. Meanwhile, the officers continued with their formalities, unfazed by her delusions of grandeur, as her charges piled up. Chelsea's commitment to chaos seemed unshakable as her disruptive behavior continued, even after being placed in the back of the police vehicle. The vehicle, which should have symbolized her path to accountability, became just another stage for her unruly antics. First, Chelsea added spitting inside the car to her already impressive list of offenses. Her previous outbursts had already tested the limits of law enforcement patience, but now she chose to show a complete disregard for decorum. This wasn't just any spit, it was a deliberate, theatrical gesture, as if she were putting on a twisted show for an audience that only included the officers and the poor, long-suffering upholstery of the police vehicle. And just when the officers thought they had reached the peak of her antics, Chelsea, in what can only be described as a manic bid for attention, began attempting karaoke in the back seat. With a voice louder than necessary for a vehicle's confined space, she belted out lyrics to an imaginary tune, adding off-key renditions of pop songs to a roster of bizarre conduct. The officer driving the car kept his eyes on the road, presumably trying to avoid adding deliberate eardrum damage to his list of job hazards. When they arrived at the police station, Chelsea showed no signs of calming down. In fact, she seemed to see the station as the perfect arena for a new round of destruction. In a moment of defiant rebellion against the institution that had dared to contain her, she knocked over a trash bin with all the dramatic flair of a Broadway star making their exit. The trash scattered across the floor like a symbol of her crumbling composure, and the officers exchanged glances that said, "Just when we thought this day couldn't get worse." As if her performance weren't already beyond comprehension, Chelsea had one final flourish. As she was escorted through the station, she turned to an officer and, with the unfiltered wit of a drunk person who believes they are the funniest in the room, referred to him as Discount Dwayne Johnson. The officer, a seasoned professional, didn't flinch, but his internal monologue must have been quite a sight. Chelsea, however, seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation or the humiliation she was bringing upon herself. For her, this was just another chapter in the drama that had spiraled out of control since the moment she set foot in the terminal. Her antics were not only unhinged but incredibly self-destructive, a bizarre cry for attention wrapped in defiance and an utter lack of self-awareness. The only thing Chelsea succeeded in doing at that point was cementing her status as a cautionary tale in both the airline and law enforcement training manuals. The police report, filed by Officer Randall and his partner, Sergeant Lopez, painted a vivid picture of the chaos that ensued after Chelsea's arrest. It described Chelsea as visibly intoxicated, belligerent, and uncooperative, with an escalation of behavior that moved from verbal aggression to physical resistance. Officer Randall noted that Chelsea refused multiple commands to stop arguing with law enforcement and to leave the secured area, making it increasingly difficult for them to maintain control of the situation. The report carefully documented her outbursts, citing instances where she used aggressive language, including slurs and derogatory terms, directed both at the police officers and at the Southwest Airlines staff. Officer Lopez recalled Chelsea shouting, "You're just doing this because I'm a woman," while trying to push past them, her actions putting herself and the officers in immediate danger. At one point, Chelsea lunged toward a nearby gate agent in an attempt to confront them directly, forcing Sergeant Lopez to step in and physically block her path. A particularly troubling part of the report was a footnote regarding Chelsea's use of racially insensitive language. The incident was recounted in detail, with the officers noting her explicit comments which were not only inappropriate but also unprovoked. Chelsea later attempted to defend herself, claiming that her words were taken out of context during a Facebook Live broadcast, despite the police officers' accounts being clear and consistent. There was no ambiguity in the footage captured from the body cameras, and no discernible context in which her remarks could be considered anything but discriminatory. The attempt to downplay the severity of her actions only seemed to further alienate the officers and fuel her combative behavior. In addition to the racially insensitive comments, Chelsea's overall attitude during the arrest was described as one of complete non-cooperation. Despite numerous offers of assistance, including rebooking her flight with another airline or allowing her time to sober up, she refused all alternatives, insisting that this was a personal vendetta against her and that everyone had it out for her. Her combative resistance continued through the entire process, with the report noting that even as she was placed in the back of the police vehicle, she continued shouting, spitting, and making crude gestures toward the officers. The police report concluded by emphasizing that Chelsea's actions were not only a violation of public order, but also a stark demonstration of how failure to respect authority and follow basic societal norms can spiral out of control. The charges against her were serious: battery, resisting arrest, criminal mischief, and public disturbance, and it was clear that her refusal to cooperate only made her situation worse, casting a long shadow over what was supposed to be a simple travel experience. Chelsea Malone's saga didn't conclude with a tearful courtroom apology or some grand gesture of redemption. Instead, her story took a different, more explosive turn, leading to her permanent removal from the ranks of Southwest Airlines passengers, where she now holds an exclusive and thoroughly unwelcome place. A swift and unceremonious lifetime ban from Southwest Airlines was handed down, her name now permanently blacklisted from flying with them, joining the ranks of those who had somehow found new and inventive ways to test the boundaries of airline patience. Her social media following, ever enthusiastic about the drama, was quick to capitalize on the situation. Chelsea, never one to let a moment slip by without branding, updated her TikTok bio to read, "Aviation freedom fighter airplane, flexed biceps, Venmo me for bail." She had turned what could have been a humbling moment into a bizarre badge of honor, positioning herself as a martyr for her misunderstood cause. If anything, it only amplified the absurdity of her actions, turning her into an unwilling hero of online schadenfreude, the kind of figure people love to follow for all the wrong reasons. As for the legal ramifications, they were far from small potatoes. Chelsea was hit with a slew of charges, including battery, resisting arrest, and criminal mischief. The hefty penalties were no joke, and her bond was set at $13,500, an amount that, for most, would be a financial setback. But for Chelsea, it seemed just another speed bump in her relentless quest for viral fame. The moral of the story: there's no faster route to a lifetime ban and a starring role in a police report than by turning an everyday airport altercation into your own personal Broadway show. While Chelsea's antics may have momentarily won her the spotlight, they also earned her a permanent seat in the "Do Not Fly" section of Southwest Airlines, a location from which she may never recover. In the end, her flight to fame had only one final destination: jail, a cancelled flight, and a legacy as a cautionary tale of what happens when drama takes off without a seatbelt.